Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership, visibility, how you show up in your organization and in your industry so that you can get the results that you need. And of course, how you present yourself, presentation skills are the key. Before I get started with today's episode, I'd like to invite you to see how your presentation skills are doing by taking our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you are showing up as strong and powerful and someone to be followed, and maybe where there are some areas that a little support could help you get the results that you need and the recognition that you deserve. Today, I'm doing something a little bit different. Every Wednesday, I do a live broadcast where you can hear me talk about presence, leadership, tips. They're tips and strategies, useful things, very short broadcasts between 5 and 15 minutes where I give tips. Often it's things that my clients have asked for, and it's things that will be useful. Today, I'm pulling 4 of them together on the theme of executive presence. Executive presence is one of those strange and unknown things. Basically, it exists in the heads of the people who are looking at you and evaluating you. I've done 4 broadcasts that kind of go around the theme of how do you show up as someone to be visible, someone to be valued within your organization and outside your organization in case you want to go someplace else. The first one is about executive presence. The second one is, how do you create the visibility, which is by using stories, seeding your value with stories. The third one is one of the best ways to start speaking, to be visible and to show how valuable you are. And that is how to be speaking on panels, tips for sharing the spotlight. And then, because so often once you've done a panel or you've done a presentation, where people get in trouble is then to have a question and answer period. The fourth one is how to love a question and answer session. Fear not, question and answer sessions are a great way to show your visibility and to show your value. So let's kick it off with the first one, which is, what is executive presence and how do I get some?
Hello, and welcome to the weekly broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and I want to talk about one of the questions that I get from my clients a lot, which is, what is executive presence and how can I get some? Executive presence is one of those squishy, tricky phrases that you never really know. As Gina Graham says, I know it when I see it. I'm speaking a lot today about the 2 guests I've had who've discussed executive presence with me. Gina Graham, who talks about executive presence in the new normal, and Sharon Womble King, who talks about executive presence in a multicultural situation. the multicultural world, which is what we're in these days. The thing about executive presence is it's one of those things that you can talk about, you can think about. Sometimes it's just an excuse not to promote you. Maybe you're not the kind of person they feel comfortable with. That might be the color of your skin, might be your gender. Maybe you're a woman and they think you're too pushy because you stating your opinion. Basically, somebody not like me. Another thing that affects someone being not having executive presence in the minds of others is the performance bias. It's one of the many biases that the Lean In organization identified in a study they did with McKinsey, where the performance bias is that men are hired or promoted because of potential. Women are hired or promoted from what they've already done. So that's a whole other conversation, and I could go into that in another conversation. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how do you get executive presence. First thing is work with a coach like me, somebody whose job it is to help people develop executive presence. The second thing is go back to rule number 1 for presenting, which is use strategic empathy to make it about them. Who do you have to convince? Who are you talking to who is going to decide whether you have the executive presence required to get that position that you want? If they say you don't have executive presence, see if you can ask what specifically it is. Now, this is sometimes a tricky thing because it's kind of scary to go to somebody who says, no, you're not good enough, and says you don't have executive presence, and say, give me a specific example. If you can do it, that's the best way to do it. And if you're in a situation like that, please contact me because I can coach you through it. Some of the general things you can do, though, is be grounded. Number 1, be grounded. Stand still when you're presenting. Don't fidget. Don't fuss with your clothing. Don't twiddle your fingers. Don't blink a lot or look around when you're on a video call. Remember, you were hired for what you're good at. If you're being considered for a promotion or you want to be considered for your promotion, it's not because you're cute, it's not because you're smart, it's not because you're silly or anything, it's because you're smart, you're good at it. Sit in that authority, your power, be grounded in your power. Physically, it means don't fidget. And mentally, it means remember, you have something important to contribute. Both Gina Graham in the podcasts, I'll post the links in the comments, both Gina Graham and Sharon Womble King mentioned that. Remember where you come from. Also, remember, go back to the post I did the other day about seeding your value with stories and track your accomplishments. That's an easy way for you to remember. I too tend to only think about the things I haven't done and not the things I have done right. And I have people around me who push me to remember what I've done right. It's too easy to focus on the negative. Another thing you can do in terms of executive presence is keep eye contact. In a Western culture, and I'm mostly talking to people who work in Western cultures, in a Western culture, it's important to maintain eye contact. That shows that you're serious, that you're earnest, and that you believe in what you're going to do. Now, if you're working in an Eastern culture where it's not polite, then you need to work with your colleagues to find out when it's polite and when it isn't. And the third thing is avoid the sorry habit. Break that habit. Don't deposition yourself before you say something by, I don't know, is this the right thing to say? I don't know if this will work or not, or I don't know if this is a good idea, but just say it. These are one of the techniques we work on in the Visible and Valued Mastermind, and it has made an enormous difference with the members of the mastermind. And they will say that they've learned how to really hold themselves as someone who knows what they're doing, knows what they're talking about, and has the executive presence. If you have any further questions, it's very individual. It's different for every person. So if you have any further questions, please reach out to me here. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. In the meantime, have a wonderful week. I'll see you on the next one.
I mentioned Gina Graham and Sharon Womble King in that video. I'll be putting links to the episodes with them that are specifically about executive presence in the show notes. Another thing about grounding. When you are grounding yourself, I mean connecting yourself to the earth, connecting yourself to your power, being aware in your core of who you are and how valuable your information is. After all, you're in this position because of your expertise. So when you are needing to ground yourself, practice before you walk into the room or before you walk on stage by putting your feet on the ground and really being aware of your connection to the earth. Open a channel so that power from the center of the earth, let's say the fire from the molten core of the earth, or the green and nourishing power from the growing things below you, can flow up through your legs into your core and fill you with that power. Connect yourself to the earth. Connect yourself to your breath. One of the things that people do, especially women, is that sabotage them, is to stand with your feet crossed. Women, for some reason, stand with their feet crossed when they're standing up to speak, and it instantly shows that you are insecure. After all, if a wind came by, it could blow you over. Another one is to wander back and forth. This is something that singers do, beginning singers do, because it shows that you're not connected to your body. It's body language that is saying you're insecure and nervous. And when your feet are moving without really being connected to your brain, in the opera business, we call that happy feet. And we've all seen it. It dilutes you, makes you look weak. So stand grounded in your power. You can shift back and forth, but truly be connected to the earth. Connect your head to your body. That's the most important thing. Our next video is about seeding your value with stories. That's by using small stories, 1 minute, 90 seconds maximum, to demonstrate the good things you've done, the achievements you've done. Again, don't give away so much power that you're giving all the credit to your team. You could say, for instance, with the help of my team, I figured out how to solve that problem. I had an idea. I realized what we needed to do, and indeed, we have now made a breakthrough. Thanks to my team, who was so wonderful in supporting me. It's not bragging. It's showing people your value instead of sitting in the corner waiting to be noticed. Because unfortunately, we all know that if you just sit around and wait to be noticed for your good work, you will be taken for granted. It took me years to learn that. So please benefit from my experience and learn to tell these stories. There's an art to what they look like and an art to when you want to tell them. So after this, if you are curious, reach out to me and I can help you with it. Now let's go to seeding your value with stories.
Hello, and welcome to the weekly broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Your Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. And today I want to talk about seeding your value through stories. Seeding is a marketing tool where you drop little hints into a conversation that connect things in people's brains. We all know that storytelling is an important tool. And yet, what about our own stories? We all learned about the world through the stories that our parents tell us, but what about the stories about things that we've done? Good stories. Your stories and your skills are assets, assets which are too often taken for granted and ignored. The key to being valued and visible is to show people the good things that you've done, remind them through stories. Now, there's a whole process to this, which I do with my clients, especially in the visible and valued masterminds. But the main portion of it is keep track of your skills, create your stories, keep track of your wins, your achievements, create your stories, and then practice telling them. The key to keeping track is to make sure that you have a regular list of things you have accomplished. You might already have a system that does this. Many people do. If you don't, start it now. And one of the best solutions I've ever heard is what Cindy Solomon calls the boss email. I'll put the details in the comments, the conversation I had with her a few months ago. But basically, the system is on Sunday night, you send your manager a list of only 3 things that you're going to work on this week. What are your top 3 priorities? And then Friday morning, you report on what you've done. Keep it short, just a couple of paragraphs. Report on what has happened. Now, I'm a boss myself, and I have a team. We do this within my team. And I like getting it Friday morning instead of Friday night in case the priorities have shifted during the week and I need to say, great that you've done this and this. Forget about item number 3 because I really need you to finish something else. The important part, though, is do this in a document and then paste it into an email. Don't do it in a series of emails because you want to have a record of the things that you've done. Keep a running document of your achievements, the things that you've done well. Then here's the next step. Go through it about once a month and look for the highlights. What are the things that you've done really well that you could talk about? And then think about what are the top 3 or 5 achievements, successes during the year that you can create stories about. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh gosh, I don't have time to add one more thing. This is one of these things that's really important, but not urgent. And the best way I've found to use the important but not urgent, to get the important but not urgent things done, is to have a partner. In the Visible and Valued Masterminds, we set up partners to help you have accountability and also to reflect your stories back and forth. For instance, my clients, Maylin and Ingrid, have been doing this for several months. At first, Ingrid had a hard time talking about the things that she was good at, the achievements that she had at her organization, especially because they were easy for her. And the things that are easy for us, we tend to take for granted. So Maylin and I pushed her to dig deeper and to see where there were achievements wins, successes that were due to her particular strengths. Then we worked on creating polished stories so that she could talk about the things that she was taking for granted before that. The next piece is to practice. Mei Lin has an accent, so she had to really practice speaking clearly. But the two of them would practice with each other. One of the things you can do with your partner is to listen as if you were a stranger. How can you tell a story about what you did, what benefit it brought to the company, and what the results were? It's so much easier to do this with a partner. Then practice, because language designed to be read, language that you've written, is very different from language designed to be heard. You've got to practice saying it out loud so that you can hear where there might be gaps and where there are words that look fine on the page but aren't really good when you speak them. The results have been that Mei Lin and Ingrid are both getting a lot more attention at work. They're being asked for their opinions. They're being invited into meetings where important decisions are made. And Mei Lin has just been offered a new promotion. So it works. Remember, if you tell them right, your stories can be the seeds to grow your career. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
Once you have the stories that show your value, the next step to establishing your executive presence is to speak in public. Speak within your organization, speak outside your organization, speak outside your team, absolutely. When you talk about how to do this, one of the easy ways to start is to be on a panel. Then you're answering questions, but be prepared. Here's where you can use your 1-minute stories. It's all doable. It's all possible. This is especially important if you are a minority. You need to be visible. You need to show the world that you are there. If you aren't one of the ones who gets asked to speak on panels, then ask to be included. Speak to, if there's someone who is always the person who goes out and speaks, might be because they like to go out and speak, ask if you could do a piece of the presentation. Practice within your team where it's safe. And then if you're presenting to the whole organization, talk about part of it. Be part of it. When you're ready to lead the presentation, great. That instantly establishes you as someone with presence, someone with authority. The person who's speaking is automatic credibility. So be out there and speak. Speaking on panels is also an art. It is a performance. You can't ignore it. You can't just go and wing it. You've seen a lot of terrible panelists, but it's not really the pressure of doing a keynote. I did this. This is one of the first early videos that I did because one of my clients was asking about it. And my client Pamira told me she had been on a panel and one of the other panelists hadn't been ready, didn't know what to say, took way too much time, fumbled, gave a really terrible impression. And unfortunately, the moderator was also inexperienced and didn't know how to handle a panelist who was rambling, who didn't know how to go on and on. And because Pamira had worked with me and she was prepared, she was awesome, it really annoyed her and it annoyed the audience. So here are some tips on how to be great on a panel. Welcome to the Strategic Speaking for Results page. I'm Elizabeth Bachman of Strategic Speaking for Results and the host of the podcast, Speakers Who Get Results. And I'm really excited to be here with you today because I wanted to talk to you about panels and why speaking on panels is so useful. In one way, nowadays that we're working from home, most of us, and most of our conferences are virtual, it's even more important to get out there and speak, because you're not going to be able to meet people at a conference. The only way people are going to know that you're out there is if you are speaking. And of course, being on a panel is so much easier. You don't have to do a full keynote. You don't have to be Oprah to be invited to be on a keynote. You just have to have something clever to say, something smart to say about the topic. I like to think of it as 3 Ps. You want to prepare, promote, and stand in your power, because being on a panel brings so many benefits. It can also be a minefield if you're not careful. So here are some ways that you can think about shining as an expert guest on a panel and being asked back. And this is one of the things that I particularly love doing. First of all, the basic rules are the same as if you're doing a solo speech. You want to prepare. You want to know what's the subject, what are they asking for, what are your talking points. The key is you may only get 3 or 4 minutes each time. So make sure that your talking points are short, to the point, concise, funny. You want to be able to show you've got stories, and you want to make sure you've got facts and statistics. Dropping in an interesting statistic, dropping in a funny story, that makes you memorable. And the idea is you want to be memorable. It's a way of showing up. And remember, if you're out there speaking, you automatically get credibility. You want people around you to be able to say, or people who don't know you to say, oh yeah, I've heard of her. Yeah. And so the more people know about you, the more they're likely to reach out to you, the more they're likely to either refer a client to you or ask you to take part in an interesting project. It makes you somebody to follow, somebody to promote, or even somebody to hire. So that's the good part. The bad part is if you don't prepare, if you just show up and wait for them to ask you questions, it's easy to make a fool of yourself. We've all seen it happen. We've all seen speakers who really weren't prepared, or they got a question they didn't know they were going to ask, and so they didn't know what they were going to say. You have to prepare for this just as much as you do for doing a solo speech. It's just you don't have to do the PowerPoint this time. The other part of preparing is to make sure that you know the organization that's presenting you, that you've contacted the moderator, and that you know something about the other panelists, who else is going to be on there. Research the other panelists so that you know what their talking points are, what are their specialties, and how your specialty can fit in there. Research, I would start by contacting the organizer. If they've asked you via email, you could say yes, and could we have a quick conversation to find out what it is you want and how I can support you best. Again, you are really there the organization is giving you a chance to present to their people. So you are there to support them. How can you be of service when you speak? And then contact the moderator. Not all moderators are experienced presenters. Somebody might be asked to be a moderator because they were supposed to be on the panel and there wasn't room for them. Or they might be someone who's easily rattled. So be sure that you can talk to the moderator and find out how you can support them. What are you going to want? What do they know about the other panelists? Oh, here's another great tip, by the way. When you talk to the organizer, make sure, find out who the other panelists are going to be. And if they don't have panelists, make sure you've always have a sort of a list in your back pocket of people whose work complements yours, people who are good to be on panels with, And that way you can also be of service and of benefit by referring a friend to be on a panel with you. This is always a good thing. So it gets you good points, and there are all sorts of strategies around that about how to make the most of this opportunity. The second P is promote. Here's the thing about panels, about online conferences. There are so many of them nowadays that it's hard to get people. I mean, event organizers are always trying to get butts in seats, and butts in seats are online as well as in person. Part of your job as a presenter is to publicize the fact that you're presenting. Be out there, say, hey, come join us, bring your people. If you work in a company and you have a staff, invite your coworkers, invite your people in your company. Also invite people who might later promote you, invite your allies. If there are people that you're trying to get to sponsor you, to help you, people you want to have them notice you, make sure that you promote to them, that you're telling them that you have this speaking opportunity. So be sure that you are helping the organizers by being out there and promoting. And I must say, if you're on an online summit, quite often what happens is after you've spoken on an online summit, you can then follow up with the people who signed up with the list of attendees. Many, many online summit organizers require that you promote in order to get that list. I worked with a couple of colleagues to put together a summit in April, and we had everybody who spoke was actually promoting a program that they did. So this was a summit full of people who had great, useful information for the entrepreneurs who were listening. And we told them in the email saying, by the way, and you will be getting a list of the attendees if you promote. And the people who didn't promote didn't get that list. So that really matters. There are a lot of places where sometimes it's just polite, but there are other times where it actually really matters whether you're going to get a chance to promote to people. And the third one is stand in your power. Be ready to take part, be interested, be engaged, be able to chat back and forth if that is possible. Here's where it's also useful to talk to the moderator and the organizer if the moderator is not quite ready, and find out what sort of conversation do you want. Everybody wants interaction. Everybody wants to do things. Nowadays, if you're doing this on an online conference like Zoom or Facebook Live, you can make comments in the chat. That's very important. It's also important to be sure that you don't get walked over. We've all seen the panelists who go on and on and on and don't listen. We all seen the panelists who take over and start pursuing their agenda without listening to the others. Make sure that you push back. If you're the sort of person like me, whose first reaction is to sit back and wait for someone to finish, you need to push against that. Personally, I grew up in a family where we took turns speaking. My mother hated it if people talked over each other. So we took turns, we waited. It was one voice at a time. Then I went off to college on the other side of the country, and I spent many, many weekends with a friend who lived near campus because, I was 3,000 miles away, so I couldn't go. And that family, they love to argue. They love to debate. And the person who yelled the loudest was the person who won. And I came to that out of my quiet, polite family. It took me weeks to figure out first of all, to figure out that they weren't mad at each other. This was just the way they spoke. And secondly, how to hold my own in that conversation. And that has been a lesson that has served me the rest of my life, because I know that my tendency is to sit back and be quiet. And if you're with people whose greatest joy is having a good argument, you will be lost. So the key is to be available, watch what's going out, be ready to chime in with something appropriate. If somebody says something that you think is absolute nonsense, if maybe they're just blowhards and they're just talking to hear themselves talk, a good way to cope with that is to say, very interesting point. Always acknowledge the boasters and the blowhards. And in my experience, I've seen this, and this. So don't tell them they're wrong, because that'll just make them push more. But be ready to say, here's what I've seen, or the statistics I have seen are this, and this. It's always polite, but a good spirited argument is important. Here's another tip. You want to make sure that you are there to support the moderator, the facilitator. And if there's a facilitator who's not familiar with this, or a facilitator who's not very experienced, which everybody has to do it the first time or so, be ready to support them. Hopefully, if you have a lot of people talking or people who forgot to turn their mic off, the host of the video host will be able to mute people and then unmute people. But it doesn't always happen. So make sure that you can support the moderator. Make sure that you can be there to help the moderator out. That way, if you realize that you are there in service of the organizer, in service of the company, in service of the moderator, and to get your message out, you'll have a good time. You will be asked back. And speaking on panels can be a great way to get more visibility and get yourself out there. If you have any more questions, you can contact me here on this lesson, or you can reach out to me at elizabethbachman.com. And I'm hoping to see you, hoping to talk to you soon, and I'll see you on the next one. The last short video in this series is how to love a question and answer session. Have we all seen people who gave a great presentation, and then when it came time to answer questions, they fell apart? Or maybe you felt the dread of, you don't want to do a presentation because you don't want the unstructured part of the question and answer session. Remember, people are there with questions because they want to know. They want to know your expertise. They want you to clarify something. Having a question and answer session is a great way to show how good you are, to show how much you know. You don't have to be worried about it. They're not judging you. They actually want you to give them information. Sometimes the best parts are in the questions and the answers. You can be real, you can be smart, and show everybody how brilliant you are. So here's how to love a question and answer session.
Hello, and welcome to the weekly broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. Today, I want to talk about how to stay calm and focused and happy during a question and answer period. I've had a lot of people speak to me lately. They say, I get really nervous during the question and answer period. If somebody asks me a question, I can go on and on and on and blather, whereas a question and answer period is actually a gift to you. If you're presenting, say you're presenting to upper management, which is where people mostly get nervous around question and answer, that's what tends to wake up the voices in our heads that say, oh, you're not good enough. They're going to think you're stupid. They don't know. But the truth is, if you're the presenter, you know more about this particular subject than your listeners do. Because if they already knew, they wouldn't be asking you. So you know more, you are the expert. What you can do as the expert is to prepare your talking points. You know you have a limited amount of time, so you always want to make sure that you've got your strongest point is the one that finishes. For each of the talking points, as you go through them, think about what I call the yeah, but moments. Where are the places where your listeners would be thinking, yes, but what about the other thing? What about this other piece of it? The yeah, buts are the little objections or the little problems that people will automatically push back, especially when you declare something. You can answer them immediately by saying, now you may be thinking, Elizabeth says, be calm and cool and be happy that question answer periods. But yeah, but I still get nervous. I still forget what I'm going to say. That's the sort of thing, if they're thinking about the yeah, but moments, they're not listening to what you have to say. Prepare for those and then prepare for questions. You probably know who's going to be listening to you. So when you putting yourself at the very beginning into the shoes of your listener, into the brain of your listener, what do they want to know? Then when you do your presentation, always be ready with a couple of extra points. I like to think about the presentation will be the headlines of an article. You know how you're reading a magazine article and you skip through the headlines, and then if there's something that catches your attention, you'll read the paragraph. Most people do that. You, as the presenter, are giving them the headlines, the basics, because you don't have time to give them all the context, all the information. Make sure that you have a couple of subheadings, a couple of extra points that you can throw in if somebody wants to know more. Assume that they're going to want to know more. That's always a good thing. Be ready for that. Now, and this is in the planning as you're preparing your presentation. You always want to be sure that you know more or less what you know what you're going to say. You know where you will elaborate concisely, briefly, if somebody wants to know. If it's something that's going to be a really long answer, then you can always say, that's a much longer conversation. Can I send you something about that? Or could we have a separate conversation about this? Quite often in a question and answer period, there will be someone who has a completely different agenda from the one that you're trying to propose. And they may need to ask something that's going to give them a chance to talk. It's your time. You get to say, that's a much larger conversation. Please contact me. We'll talk about it. This is especially if you're presenting to the public, they don't know you. The place where we tend to psych ourselves out is when you're presenting to a boss, somebody in upper management. There's something about that hierarchy that makes people think, I do this too, that makes people think, oh, he's really important, or she's, I need to make a good impression on her so that she will approve what I do. Maybe I can get that next promotion. If you are psyching yourself out about what they might be thinking about you, what do they think about you? Then you'll be stuck in your own head and you won't have a chance to truly focus on what they are actually asking. The truth is, most of the time, if they are asking a question, it's because they're interested and you're the expert. So be prepared. Remember that you are giving them a gift of knowledge. This presentation is a gift. Maybe it's a progress report. Maybe it's a report about a problem you found and you have to be able to deal with it. It might be bad news.
If it's bad news, it's not just you, it's the whole company or the whole group that has to deal with it. You might be the person who has to deliver the bad news, but there's always going to be a solution somewhere. If they have a question, if they have a concern, it's because they want to know and you are the expert. That's where pre-planning will help you out. If you have in advance some possible answers, you can do that. The other place that people worry about all the time, and truly worrying about question and answer periods is something that happens beforehand, and it can sabotage you when you're in the question and answer period. Remind yourself that it's a gift. It's okay to not have the answer at your fingertips. You may be an expert, but if you have a lot of information in your head, it's okay to say, I don't have the response. I don't have it at my fingertips. Can I get back to you on that? That should be fine. Be prepared as you can. If they ask you something you haven't thought of, say, good question. Here's the other part. The best answer always is, good question. That's a great question. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. It acknowledges the person who's asking the question, and it gives you an extra couple of seconds to think. So that's always good. When you are talking about good question, bad question, answer them that way, then give them what you can. There's one more piece of this. If you are doing a public presentation, say you're doing an informational webinar to a group and you don't know who's listening, you may not know, there might not be anybody who asks a question. And then you have dead air, which is horrible. That's one of the worst things. If nobody asks a question, it doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't like you. It just means that they're thinking about something else, or they don't have a question at the moment. Here's where preparation can help you again. Be prepared with one of your extra points where if they had asked the question, you could answer. A great phrase for this is, one of the questions I get a lot is, how do I cope if nobody actually has a question? Then you can offer an extra little tidbit, a little extra piece of information that will help people. Quite often, that is the tidbit that stays in their minds. So make sure it is memorable, make sure it's a hook. And remember, question and answer periods are a gift. You are giving them a gift of extra knowledge. Embrace it, enjoy it, have fun. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
These are some of the many, many, many tips that I give out every Wednesday. Check my LinkedIn, check my Facebook, check my YouTube for more tips like these. I'll be putting more information in the show notes. But remember, executive presence is you. It's how you show up as a leader, how you are visible, and show your value to your organization, to your industry, and to the world. Again, if you're curious after listening to this on how your presentation skills are doing, you can take our free quiz at speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.